studying the texts. The Nativity story itself provides a good example. It's widely accepted, and the Christmas cards keep telling us that Jesus was born in a stable. The Gospels don't say that. There is no stable mentioned in any authorized Gospel. The Nativity is not mentioned at all in Mark or John, and Matthew says quite plainly that Jesus was born in a house. So where did the stable come from? It came from a misinterpretation, really, of the Gospel of Luke, which relates that Jesus was laid in a manger, not born, but laid, and the manger was then, and still is, nothing more than an animal feeding box. One only has to study society history of the time to recognize the fact that it was perfectly common for mangers to be used as cradles, and they were often brought indoors for that very purpose. So why has it been presumed that this particular manger was in a stable? Because the English translations of Luke tell us that there was no room in the inn. Must then have been in a stable. But the pre-English translations of Luke don't talk about any inn. The manuscript of Luke does not say there was no room in the inn. In fact, there were no inns in the East in those days. There are very few inns there now, and if there are, they're illegal. People lodged then in private houses. It was a common way of life. It was called family hospitality. Homes were open for travelers. Come to that, if we're really going to be precise about this. There were no stables in the region, either. In fact, stable is a wholly English word, and it specifically defines a place for keeping horses of a particular stable. Who on earth rode around on horses in Judea? Oxen, camels. The odd Roman officer might have had a horse, but even the mules and the oxen, if kept under cover, would have been kept under some sort of a shed or outhouse, not in a stable. As for the mythical inn, the Greek text actually does not say there was no room at the inn. By the best translation, it actually states that there was no provision in the room. As mentioned in Matthew, Jesus was born in a house, and, as correctly translated, Luke reveals that Jesus was laid in a manger, an animal feeding box, because there was no cradle provided in the room. If we're on the subject of Jesus' birth, I think we ought to look at the chronology here, because this is important as well, because the Gospels, the two Gospels that deal with the Nativity, actually give us two completely different dates for the event. According to Matthew, Jesus was born in the reign of King Herod the Great, who debated the event with the Magi and ordered the slaying of the infants. Well, Herod died in 4 BC, and we know from Matthew that Jesus was born before that. And because of that, Most standard concordant Bibles and history books imply that Jesus' date of birth was 5 BC, because that is before 4 BC and Herod was still reigning. So that's a good date. But in Luke, a completely different date is given. Luke doesn't tell us about King Herod or anything like that. Luke says that Jesus was born while Cyrenius was governor of Syria, the same year that the Emperor Augustus implemented the national census. The census which Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem to be a part of. There are relevant points to mention here, and they are both recorded in the 1st century Jewish annals such as the Antiquities of the Jews. Cyrenius was appointed governor of Syria in 86. This was the very year recorded of the national census, put into operation by Cyrenius and ordered by Emperor Augustus. As Luke tells us, it was the first and only ever recorded census for the region. So Jesus was born before 4 BC and in 86. Is this a mistake? No, not necessarily, because in the way it was originally portrayed we're actually looking at 2 quite specific births. Both Gospels are correct. We're looking at Jesus' physical birth, and we're looking at Jesus' community birth. These were defined at the time as the first and second births, and they applied specifically to people of particular groups and certainly to dynastic heirs. Second births for boys were performed by way of the ritual of rebirth. It was very physical. They were wrapped in swaddling clothes and born again from their mother's womb. It was a physical ceremony. Second births for boys took place at the age of 12. So we know that Jesus was 12 in 86. Unfortunately, the latter-day transcribers of Luke completely missed the significance of this, and it was their endeavor to somehow tie in this event about swaddling clothes and being born then, that led to this mention of the nonsense about the stable. So if Jesus was 12 in 86, this means that he was born in 7 BC, which ties in perfectly well with the Matthew account that he